Hello, everybody, and welcome to EarthX CEO, a weekly series on EarthX TV. Each week, we speak with business presidents and CEOs about their leadership on sustainability and climate change. I'm your host, Bob Perciasepe, president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. And with me today is Jim Perdue. He's chairman of Purdue Farms, and of course, many of us know him as their key spokesperson. He's been there in that job since 1991. And during Jim's time there, the company has grown to become an international force in agriculture and an innovator in organic products, in animal care, and in worker wellness. So welcome to joining us, Jim.
It's great to be here, Bob. Thanks.
We're really happy to have you, and we're looking forward to this conversation. So you heard my very brief introduction. I mean, obviously, you guys are a very complex and very important force in agriculture, and you have an overarching theme that I think you've adopted called responsible food and agriculture, and those are powerful words. And I'd be interested in you just telling the audience a little bit about how you think about that kind of a responsible food and agriculture, because that obviously runs beyond climate change and sustainability, but also to animal care and your workers. So a little bit from you on how you see that the industry and how you see Purdue Farms in that way.
Yeah, I think, we're a 100-year-old company. In fact, the two gentlemen behind me are the founder and the real person, my dad, who really built the company until we exchanged roles in 1991, as you said. But, I think we have a strong culture here, and it's based on our vision to be the most trusted name in premium protein in our foods business. And the values came from the gentleman behind me, and especially integrity, which is to do the right thing for the right reason, keep our promises, stewardship, which not only is about protecting the environment, but the welfare of our associates, our welfare of our animals that are in our care, and living up to the civic responsibilities, which have made us successful this far, and it's something that really drives our business. And being a fourth generation, family-owned and food and agricultural company, we have a responsibility to all of our constituents. Whether that's our communities where we have business, our associates, our customers, our consumers. They're all constituents that we think about each and every day. And so, and it's about leadership, and my dad was a leader in establishing a brand from a commodity and then really focusing on quality. We've become a leader in no antibiotics ever. It took us 12 years to get there, but once we arrived there, the rest of the industry had to follow us. We're the largest producer of organic chicken now in the U.S. And we really are. I think that leadership role is really important to us, and I think consumers today, are very different. Millennial consumers, they're skeptical of big agriculture. They're interested in transparency. They want to know. They have a ton of questions, and so we have to do our job to answer those questions and make sure they know how we take care of our animals, what we're doing for the environment, what we feed our animals, what's in the finished product, as far as preservatives and that sort of thing. And so, that's always been something very important to us as a company, and especially my dad. My dad always taught us that if you listen to the consumer and you take care of your people and produce quality products that are relative to the consumer, they'll keep you in business. And that's something that it's important each and every day we remember that.
Yes, it's quite a history, and I don't know if anybody mentioned this to you, but I had the fortune to meet your dad There was a time when I was the Secretary of Environment for the state of Maryland in the late 80s, just before you became the chair. And he was quite an individual, and I really enjoyed working with Purdue Farms back then. We were working on Chesapeake Bay issues, which I know are near and dear to your own heart. Maybe I'll touch on the oyster work before the interview is over. But yeah, it's everything you just said is an important aspect.
And you worked for a great governor too.
Yes, so, I did.
He was fantastic. My dad loved him because he was, he was in the book In Search of Excellence as a mayor of the city of Baltimore.
Yes,
and Mayor Schaefer was a terrific governor.
For those watching and may not know who we're talking about, Jim just mentioned it. Governor William Donald Schaefer was governor of Maryland in the late 80s and early 90s, and really a leader on the Chesapeake Bay. And Purdue was a strong supporter of the work we were doing, and the work and the impact that agriculture has on the environment was really emerging, and the new techniques and styles that could be, and approaches and practices that could be used. I want to mention one thing quickly before you go too far into the environment side, and that is I mentioned it at my opening, and you mentioned worker well-being, and you guys just won an award for the work you've been doing in protecting the workers and taking care of that business while COVID-19 is going on, from the Consumer World magazine. That's quite an honor, I think.
Yeah, our goals as a company we call them the 4 Ps. And they're people, products, planet, and profitability. And people comes first. So we've always had a major focus, whether it's on wellness centers in all of our facilities, which is free health care. They get to see a doctor. They get paid while they're seeing the doctor. Worker safety, peer review within the plants if you have a grievance. And of course, in this most recent time period with COVID-19, I mean, we're only as good as our associates, and they're a terrific group. And they really went above and beyond, did everything we asked of them, and we certainly appreciated getting that award.
Well, congratulations. And so going back to some of the work that you all are doing on the environment, things have changed quite a bit in agriculture over the last 50 years, over the last 100 years for sure. Now we have things like cover crops and soil management practices. Tell me about some of the things that you are working on with some of the farmers you work with, and as well as some of the energy issues that you may be facing, solar energy on some of the chicken houses, or however you guys are working on that.
Yeah, well, we have a scorecard for the environmental goals that we've set, and we report every year in our corporate social responsibility report that we give to customers, and anyone who wants to have it reviews that. And of course, it has a lot of areas in it, but environmental is a big piece of it. But before we even started that, and we have goals that started in 2017. It was a 5-year setting for those goals. But even before that, 10, 15 years ago, we covered, for example, a lagoon in Cromwell, Kentucky, working with the Tennessee Valley Authority. And we capture the methane and we generate electricity that we help run the operation there. We've got solar arrays at the office here and also at our Bridgeville, Delaware feed mill. And actually, when we renovated the offices here about 10 years ago, we got LEED Platinum certification, which in Maryland, it was the first one on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and only one of 20 in the state of Maryland. We've been working on things for quite a while, and we also set up in our bonus system for our management of our company. We have a planet part of the bonus system, because one thing I found is, if you really believe in something, you got to put everything behind it, including the motivation to do it, even from a financial standpoint. So everybody, senior management here in the company are on that system, and that's why we built the scorecard. And when we set up the goals in 2017, we did things like a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas intensity, and we're at this point toward that 2022 goal. We're about 5.5% toward that. We wanted to reduce water usage, and actually we have not been successful so far. And that part of it is because there was a food security policy that came about here a few years ago. We're looking specifically at salmonella and other foodborne pathogens, and water is one of the #1 ways you prevent that. So, but we do, having said that, we're working, we've got 3 operations that have a air chilling system, which saves a lot of water, because one of the big parts of a harvest plant is you have to get the temperature of the chicken down to the low 30s by USDA regulation. And water chilling baths are the way we've done it in the past, but they use quite a bit of water in order to do that. Air chilling, you don't use water at all to do that. So that's an example of how we're trying to save water there. And finally, a 90% waste diversion from landfill. And so we've come up from last year at 68%. We're now at 79.5%. And we actually have our biggest operation in the company is now 100% free of sending anything to the landfill. And one of the challenges of COVID-19, by the way, has been trying to address some of these issues. Requires, for example, we're looking at trying to cover another anaerobic lagoon with a covering to capture the methane, and we haven't been able to get the consultants on premise because of COVID-19. So it's slowing us down a little bit, but we still think we'll be moving toward that 2022 goal going forward.
Well, those goals are commendable, and your transparency, I think, is really remarkable, and it's very helpful. As you point out, customers really are looking for this kind of information on how the companies and the products that they deal with every day in their own personal lives are how they're making progress. And so all of that sounds very helpful and really helps drive the motivation of staff, as you just put it out there. You mentioned the digesters, the anaerobic digesters to create methane from the animal waste, and the fact that you want to do some more. Do you see this as an area of potential for animal agriculture? I know some of the power companies in, let's say, Virginia have really started to look at what they call renewable natural gas, to blend into the other natural gas. Do you have any thoughts as you've talked to other leaders in the industry?
Yeah, well, we have 2 of these where we've covered our anaerobic lagoons and are capturing the methane from them. Now, a lot of our harvest facilities are in cities or towns that have a wastewater system, and all we do is send that to them. So we don't have our own lagoon. They actually have the lagoon. So, but as the incentives improve, like I said, in Tennessee and in Kentucky, that's what drove that. And I think those are improving each year. The incentives for us to do that. Even putting in the solar panels, it was incentive on credits, that really helped move us in that direction. You may be familiar that we had a facility in 2001. We built Purdue Agri Recycle, and we were doing, about 150 to 200 chicken houses worth of poultry litter a year. We were recycling that. And that facility we sold to a company, and they're now going to be putting in anaerobic digesters because they're experts. We decided to exit the business, but we are actually arm in arm with them because we're still supplying the organic materials to help produce these, both a composting material and the anaerobic digester, which is a different digester compared to the anaerobic lagoons we were talking about.
Yeah, I think these things continue to evolve, and that sounds like a great arrangement, having somebody that's, on that as their main line of business. Is obviously this is not your main line of business, but one that you can support, indirectly from the product, the waste products, and making them into something that could be used.
One thing my grandfather always said is stick to your knitting. And so, meaning do what you do well and don't try to do things you don't do well. So there's people who know a lot more about that than we do.
Yeah, and some of that is also reflected, I think, in probably your relationships with the feed supply chain. Where you have farms that are producing beans or corn, and the practices that they may be using on their land to improve productivity, but also maybe sequester carbon in the soil. So you've talked about the heritage that you have in the company from the gentleman on the wall behind you, which is a powerful legacy that many of us do know about. But the things you're doing now are things that they did similar things, but on different matters. You're now looking at this sustainability issue. You mentioned your brand, your organic brands, Simply Smart, Panorama. I'd say I got some of these brands down.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the largest organic chicken, broiler providers, I think in the country. So how does your own personal leadership, Jim, help motivate the company on these matters? I mean, obviously there's a lot of moving parts here. How do you feel your own leadership is helping move this along?
Well, one person asked me one time, what's your number one job as CEO? And really, it's the keeper of the values. And the values are what drive me and what drive the company. And I want to make sure we're, I always say that the example to me is, if somebody has a barrel of some solvent at some operation we have, and they have to get rid of it, I want them to know that what we want them to do is go out and bring somebody in to dispose of it correctly, instead of taking it in the woods and dumping it, and so the values are what that is. It's the decisions, I think, that are made every single day at every single facility we have. And I want people to making those decisions, knowing what the company believes in and what the values are of the company. And, I have enough of a bit of a science background to know how important, these things are, to the environments. And we deal with farmers every day, and farmers, I think sometimes they get a bum rap. I think they are very interested in the environment also. They fish, they hunt in the same environments where they have operations. And so they want to do the right thing, and they just need to know what it is that they need to be moving toward, any help that we can give them or that's needed to make that happen. And of course, as you know, in the Chesapeake Bay region, it's a very sensitive issue, very sensitive area. There are things happening in this region that you won't see anywhere else in the United States, mainly because of I think the sensitivity of the Chesapeake Bay. And so, what we learn here, we're expanding that to other operations where we have facilities and have operations.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina, for instance, if you have operations down there, you got the Pamlico Sound. It has similar issues as the Chesapeake Bay, and local water supplies all over the country, no matter where you're located, can benefit from the water quality improvements and how the agriculture is done on the eastern shore of Maryland.
One simple example of that is chicken houses here have to have a cement pad at the end of the chicken house. And that is when they catch the chickens, poultry litter comes out of the house on the tracks of the tractor and that sort of thing. And having a cement pad, something as simple as a cement pad, you can collect the litter, for example. But in North Carolina, for a long time, that wasn't even required. But I think it was because of the sensitivity here that made that, but that's an example of something we've carried to other states, when we build chicken houses, for example.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned when you were talking about water and the dilemma of some of the pathogen controls and the temperature management, and and so you have all these conflicting goals that you have to manage in this industry. What are some? You mentioned one. What are some of the things that are most challenging, perhaps, in your mind, that require more innovation or more work to try to crack the nut, so to speak?
Well, I mean, for example, in this region, there's now a phosphorus management tool in place, which I think is a good thing because it's based on science. And it really affects the farmers, but we're sort of hooked together, the farmers and we. We can't grow chickens. The farmers they do the best job growing chickens. So we have to make sure they're successful, which is why we built that Purdue Ag Recycle in 2001, when the Water Quality Act in Maryland was enacted, if you remember at that time. And so the phosphorus management tool is an example of where the soil is measured for phosphorus. For years, Bob, the nitrogen was the only nutrient that was a concern because it's soluble and it could go into the drinking water. And that was the only thing. It wasn't really until the turn of 2000 that people were concerned about phosphorus, which is not soluble. But we found out through science that it moves laterally, to a ditch and then to a stream and into the Chesapeake Bay. So there was a lot more interest and focus on phosphorus. And so, so the phosphorus management tool, I think, is a great example of using science to help manage something. And if a farm is too high in phosphorus in the soil, then they cannot use poultry litter on that farm, because unfortunately with the nitrogen of the poultry litter also comes phosphorus. So they have to use just nitrogen only in those situations. But I think and then what we do is move the litter from an area that is high in phosphorus, move it to an area where it's low in phosphorus, where they can use it, because it actually is a great organic material to use as a fertilizer, because they're going to buy chemical fertilizer if they can't use an organic fertilizer. So, but I think these kinds of things are moving forward. You mentioned the cover crop program, which is a great program. I think it's 17 million acres have been used this year are used each year for cover crop, paid for by the flush tax here in the state of Maryland, for example, that we all pay toward. But it's a good use of the money, certainly. That and wastewater facility upgrades in municipalities, I think, is also another use of that money. So, but those are a couple of examples.
Well, those are good ones. The soil, the managing the nutrients in the soil is key, along with the genetics of some of the crops that are used for the supply of feed. When I actually went to an ag school when I got my undergraduate degree, Cornell, and 80 bushels an acre was a great yield back in the late 60s. Today, 150, probably higher in some places. So
higher.
Yeah. So
178 is the national average now.
There you go. I don't keep up as much as I should. But the bottom line is that the amount of nutrients per bushel has gone down. Yeah, and so that's an important thing. And you're looking at a different kind, additional management. But you mentioned the flush tax. What is the flush tax for the people who may be listening here from Texas or California?
Yeah, I think it was Governor Ehrlich, if I'm not mistaken, who enacted that and it was part of to help the Chesapeake Bay, mainly the upgrading wastewater facilities in municipalities. But then also it was used also for these cover crops. Cover crops are important because after a field is harvested in this time of the year, right now, October, November, there's nothing to uptake the nitrogen or phosphorus. And so they used to lay barren until the spring. But by planting a cover crop, you're actually taking up whatever nutrients are left in the soil and sucking it up into the wheat or the rye or whatever the cover crop is, leave it there all winter, and then either plow it under in the spring before you plant your crops, or you harvest it like wheat. You harvest it in the spring and then plant soybeans behind it. So it's a great program and another example of how, I think the farmer said, great, but I need some help. And that flush tax was the help.
So it provides a little bit of funding per acre to help offset the cost of planting the cover crops, unless they're going to try to harvest it and get paid that way. But
and the only requirement, interestingly and rightfully so, is they're not allowed to fertilize it.
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't want to fertilize it if it's there to take up what excess nutrients there are. So,
So this enters the conversation that maybe we'll get as we get near the end here is businesses and industry, particularly agricultural industry, as you've already pointed out, are great stewards of the land. I mean, they can't function, unless they're doing that. But you also mentioned the interaction of some government programs that help us to move things in a direction. The federal government with the Conservation Reserve Program, maybe in the future getting paid for carbon sequestration into the soils. What do you, recognizing the sensitivity of this in agricultural, in the agricultural industry, what kind of government policies do you see as maybe being most beneficial to moving, continuing to move things in a sustainable direction, and also perhaps to sequester carbon or more of the nutrients?
Well, one thing I mentioned was these anaerobic lagoons. What makes that work is the credits that are available through the power companies in those states, and those are very, very helpful. The flush tax we were talking about is very helpful in contributing to a healthier environment. But I think anytime, another example, truthfully, is I think it was about 12 years ago, we entered into an agreement with the EPA in Region 3, where they can't go to every farm, but we go every day. And so we worked together with Region 3, and they came down and educated our flock advisors on what to do. And then we reported on each farm what we were finding. And so, that was, I think, a really good program. Unfortunately, the policies changed and we had to exit that. But I'd say for about 2 years, it was really, really interesting the way, the government and we were working together toward the same end. And it was really good. Another good example is the Farm Bill. We need the Farm Bill to be fully funded because there's some areas in there that are really critical, I think, for the, for the environment.
Yeah, I think the conservation programs in the Farm Bill have done amazing work all over the country, and certainly the Chesapeake Bay has benefited from it. And I appreciate. Yeah, I think this idea that you just put out there that in the past it may have been, a concern in agriculture about government regulations, but in the future, perhaps there's a path forward where there's a government agriculture partnership where toward a common goal. And I like the fact that you've pointed out a couple of examples of where that's starting to happen.
And the key there is trust. It's unfortunately sometimes one party doesn't trust the other party that they're really going to do what they say. In that situation, we just had a couple of leaders that really developed a good trusting relationship, and anything can happen when you truly trust that we're going to do what we say and they're going to do what they say. I wish we could have a lot more of that, today.
Yeah, well, it's certainly something I'm advocating, and many of the CEOs that I've been talking to on this series really are looking forward to a way that we can make that kind of a partnership work for everyone, including the environment and the public, and how difficult it'll be to deal with some of the issues related to climate change. And there's a great role for agriculture to play there. This begs the issue of the relationship between the economy and environmental practices and sustainability practices. Just at a high level, Jim, you got an award for worker well-being during COVID, and many businesses around the country obviously are hurting because of COVID. You mentioned a consultant, you couldn't get a consultant to come out and look at some of the lagoon work, but providing food is an essential business, and you guys have been able to maintain a reasonable workforce. So there's this relationship between the economy and doing good, I think has a lot of potential, and would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think food connects everybody, and one thing I'm glad of is we're in the food business, because that's something that's needed. But keeping Americans fed, keeping farmers working, and I was amazed at all what we call frontline workers. The truck drivers delivering the product, to the stores. Our line workers, coming in each and every day, doing what we asked of them as far as temperature taking and social distancing, and wearing their PPP, or PPE, I guess it is. Yeah, I get mixed up with the government program. I think it's PPP, but I think that's and I think just having a lot of open dialogue. We have open dialogue with environmental groups, with groups that are very interested in animal welfare and how the animals are taken care of. In fact, we just had our animal care summit here last week, where we review all the things we're doing about our animals. And on the call, besides customers and farmers, is about 5 or 6 animal advocacy groups, which used to be, like I said, as far as trust is concerned, used to be adversaries, but now they come every year, and we talk about the things we're doing, and they make suggestions, and so it's a really, I think, healthy dialogue, and I think you make a lot more progress in that kind of an environment than you do in an adversarial environment. And we want to do the same thing with environmental groups, and we do. We have some very good relationships with a lot of environmental groups, because we all have the same end goal in mind. And it's just a matter of getting there at a certain rate of speed.
So I couldn't agree more. Trust is a key element, and finding a way to build that and get these partnerships going, I think can move us more quickly than if we didn't. I'm going to ask you one quick final question, Jim. You mentioned you had a science background, and I happen to know, and many people probably know, that your college degrees are in marine biology and fisheries, your protein that swims, and you're on the board of the Oyster Recovery Project in Maryland. And while this has probably a tangential relationship, because obviously you guys are working on pollution control, but say a few words about you're trying to keep your finger in that world.
I think my dad told me I was overeducated when I came back to the company, but that's because he never went to college. He never finished college. So, but I'm a huge advocate for the oyster in the Chesapeake Bay. I mean, these guys filter 50 gallons a day per oyster, and back when there was a standing crop of 4 billion oysters in the bay, that's a lot of water that was filtered. Every 3 days, the entire volume of the Chesapeake Bay was filtered. But we're down to very, very few oysters compared to them because of a lot of reasons. Overfishing and diseases are the 2 major ones that have affected it. But the Oyster Recovery Partnership is putting about 1 billion oysters a year back into the Chesapeake Bay in sanctuaries where the Corps of Engineers and NOAA are directing us to do it. And we're doing river systems like Harris Creek on the eastern shore, the Minokan River. We've done the Tredeavon and others. And then we monitor the oyster recovery each year in those river systems. And because we got to get the oyster back in the bay. They're the filter that makes a difference. And it's a missing component. It's just like a car without an oil filter it won't run. Well, the Chesapeake Bay has to have a filter because the nutrients aren't going to go away. They're still there. More people want to live on the water And so wastewater facilities are built. Well, that's still new nitrogen and phosphorus going into the bay. So our focus is to get the oysters back in, and it's a great partnership. We get our 30% of our oyster shell, which we put the baby oysters on, come from restaurants in Maryland, Virginia, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and we send trucks to these oyster bars and pick up used oyster shell, bring it back, clean it, and then we use it to put baby oysters on. So it's a marvelous program, and we're making a lot of progress, and there's a lot of momentum from around the bay to make this work. It's just one piece, but I think everybody has to do their part.
Well, I wanted you to get a pitch in for some of that, and I appreciate the work that you're doing on that oyster recovery. I have in my office, which I've not been in, this is my home here. I have a 9,000-year-old sort of from a sedimentary layer oyster shell in my office. So from a reef oyster reef construction project. Well, Jim, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I appreciate all the work you guys are doing, and for you taking the time to talk to the audience about Purdue and the commitments you guys make and your own personal leadership vision. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.